So I am here on this beautiful and breezy July morning, and I am between the herb garden, the shrubbery, and the pollinator garden behind me. And it's just glorious because things are just starting to bloom. So I see some of the echinacea in the back. The pycnanthemum is just starting to bloom. I have some monarda in front of me. The valerian has just finished blooming, but there's a lot more that is here. And I have been seeing some butterflies and moths in the gardens, and that always brings a smile to my face. And most of us would delight to see butterflies and moths in our gardens because then we feel like we're doing something right. But when we go to garden centers, we're often sold pollinator plants, and that emphasizes blooms. And it's true that adult butterflies and moths are attracted to blooms in order to nectar. But if we want a robust population of butterflies and moths, we have to be thinking about their host plants, which are essentially the food that they eat when they are caterpillars. And most of us are not thinking about having caterpillar food in our garden and our landscapes. It's just like we see the butterflies and they're there, but what are they actually eating? And if we think about having insect-chewn leaves in our gardenscape, most of us will bristle at that. So I think we have to get out of that thinking or that worldview and embrace the fact that our butterflies and our moths will actually eat plants in our gardenscapes and our landscapes if we plant them. So today I'm going to emphasize 15 to 20 plus host plants for our native butterflies and moths. And these are going to be plants that have great horticultural value. So what I mean by that is that they have some interesting blooms, and then you typically see them in run-of-the-mill gardens. So that's what we're going to cover today. Now keep in mind that I am really emphasizing some of our butterflies and moths that are native to my region. So this is the Finger Lakes region in New York, so I will have an emphasis on that. Some of these butterflies and moths are more cosmopolitan species, and some are actually more localized as well. So keep that in mind and let this serve as maybe an inspiration for wherever you are in the world to learn about the butterflies and moths in your landscape and what their host plants are, and to seek out those host plants in order to be able to grow them. Now, maybe some of them don't have horticultural, maybe some of the plants don't have horticultural value and you don't want to see them in your garden, but maybe you could plant them more in the wildscapes of your area, or you could plant them in between some of those more beautiful plants that you would like to see in your gardenscapes. And the first one that I will make mention of is last year I had planted some Antennaria dioica. Now this is not even our native Antennaria, which is commonly called pussy toes. And I looked and there were caterpillars all over the Antennaria dioica and its rubra. It was a pink flowering variety of pussy toes. And I found out that this plant was a host plant for our American lady butterflies. So this is the Vanessa butterflies. And I got really excited because even though I wasn't probably going to see those Antennaria dioica rubra blooms, I know that I was doing my part in the sense that this was a host plant for our Vanessa butterflies, and that's why I will see more of our American lady butterflies. So I took the initiative this year to plant more of our native Antennaria neglecta, and I think I have the plantain-leaved Antennaria, and I planted it all around our herb garden and more in our pollinator garden as well. And lo and behold, I actually saw more of those caterpillars on those different clumps. I'm now a big believer in planting more than one in the garden, even though I like to have a very diverse gardenscape. There's an opportunity to plant more than one clump so that you have enough for the blooms and enough for caterpillar food as well. So the next plant I would like to cover is violas, or our violets. And these are really understated plants. And typically I would see them like on our banks, or if I go walking in the woods, you'll see little clumps of violas. And that's really encouraged me to plant them in our gardens as well, almost like little understory plants. And these are the host plants for a wide range of our fritillaries. So these are fritillaries like the Aphrodite fritillary, the Atlantis fritillary, our great spangled fritillary as well. You often see them on like the common blue violet or the downy yellow violet or marsh blue violet, our meadow fritillary, and of course our variegated fritillary butterfly. In the case of the variegated fritillary butterfly, they're also attracted to our passion flowers or maypops, which are, by the way, exquisite vines. They have the most amazing flower. So I have that planted up on our fence line as well, and I'm hoping it'll actually flower this year. So that is another great plant. But again, violas, just basically like a little sprinkle some seeds. They have a tendency to be very beautiful plants also within the lawnscape as well, because they're so low growing. Most of them don't grow higher than 6 inches and sometimes even less. So I think that would be a really wonderful plant to encourage within our gardenscapes to attract fritillary caterpillars and eventually butterflies. A wonderful observation that I had last year when I was walking through the meadow is I saw the caterpillar of the Baltimore checker spot on our native foxglove beard tongue, which is our Penstemons. And Penstemons are an excellent plant for the gardenscape. I think we have probably over a dozen different varieties of Penstemon that we have in our pollinator garden. And of course, we have them for the blooms because the bumblebees and a lot of our native flies tend to like the Penstemon. They kind of go down those little throats of the Penstemon flowers. But knowing that our Baltimore checker spot, which is a very cool caterpillar and butterfly, likes that too, is pretty uplifting. Now, it is kind of more of the secondary plant that the Baltimore checker spot likes. The other plants that it's mostly attracted to is our Chelone glabra. So that is our white turtlehead. But I also have like a pinkish color turtlehead because there's a number of cultivated varieties of turtlehead, and I have that in our pollinator garden. But I've made an effort to bring some of the straight species, the Chelone glabra, in our lakes and our ponds because it tends to like a more wet environment. So you will commonly see it around like stream sides or ponds and riparian areas, for example. So that is encouraging that you could plant some of those plants within your lawnscape or your gardenscape to attract the Baltimore checker spot. The last plant that I will make mention that it will eat is also the monkey flower. So that's our Mimulus alatus and our Mimulus ringens, which are two also very beautiful plants. Now, there are two other butterflies and moths that are attracted to the Chelone glabra, the Penstemon, and the monkey flower, and that's the checkered skipper as well as the dotted checker spot. Another plant that I absolutely adore in our garden is bronze fennel. So you can have the straight fennel, which is a bit greener, but I think there's a lot of horticultural value that comes with bronze fennel. One thing I will make mention though, is that it has a tendency to seed, and if you don't collect the seeds, which are an excellent medicinal digestive, by the way, so I encourage you to collect the seeds, is it kind of spread all over. So now it's in my pollinator garden, it's jumped the fence over into the shrubbery, it's between all the stepping stones and everything, so it's really become prolific. But last year I noticed the black swallowtail caterpillar on our bronze fennel, and typically a black swallowtail female will come and place just a few select eggs on a plant. So it won't be completely demolished. And of course, like fennel is a pretty robust but elegant plant that can handle having some caterpillar damage to it. In fact, I didn't even notice what it ate because the fennel is so large. And as I shared, fennel is, I think it's really beautiful. It has one of those umbelliferous tops, yellow flowers, bronzy leaves. You could use some of the leaves fresh in salads. You could use some of the seeds as a digestive. So excellent plant within the landscape. And of course, the black swallowtail is attracted to some of those plants that are in the Apiaceae. So Daucus carota, it'll look at parsley and a number of others. But I think the bronze fennel really stands out for me as one of the plants that has great horticultural value. I would be remiss if I didn't mention columbine. So our native columbine is Aquilegia canadensis, and it's got this red and yellow flower, so it's really pretty. blooms a bit earlier in the season. We actually had some blooming down below underneath a tree that we had planted. This one attracts the columbine dusky wing. So this is not like one of those beautiful bodacious butterflies that have all these beautiful colors like a swallowtail, for instance, but it's kind of a more demure, subtle butterfly, and they utilize our columbine. Now, we have lots of great cultivated varieties and non-native columbines that people have introduced in the horticultural trade. I do not know whether they utilize those species, so it's always good to plant your native variety in your landscape in order to encourage some of your native butterflies and caterpillars to eat those plants. The next butterfly is the common buckeye, and this tends to use a variety of different plants, and I had already mentioned Penstemon, and that is one of the many host plants for the common buckeye. But the other reason why I wanted to mention it is because they love snapdragons. And I just put my first snapdragon last year in the pollinator garden, and I noticed it was really blooming pretty early on this year. And I might actually increase it. I have not seen a common buckeye yet in this landscape. It doesn't mean that it doesn't exist, but it's one of those butterflies maybe on the bucket list that I would like to see here. So think about it from the standpoint of like Penstemon. It also likes toadflax and snapdragons. So look for those at your garden center in order to plant into your landscape if you want to attract common buckeye. Next up on my list is the dainty sulfur butterfly. And this is a butterfly that's really attracted to the Asteraceae family. The Asteraceae family is an important family for both host plants as well as pollinators. But one that it seems to be attracted to most is our common sneezeweed. And common sneezeweed is a plant that I have planted within our pollinator garden, and it's quite a robust plant. Now, there's many different cultivated varieties of sneezeweed that I've noticed are much shorter. I do not know, and I have not made the observation as to whether the dainty sulfur butterfly will be attracted to some of those cultivated varieties. So if anybody has noticed that, please mention in the comments below. So some of the cuter butterflies are these tiny little hair streaks. That's what they're called. And they have these little fingers off the back of, what looks like little fingers, off the back of their back wings, and they kind of rub them together. And they're a pretty understated butterfly, but they have a cosmopolitan diet. But they particularly like sunflowers and mallows, which I think are also beautiful plants to have in the gardenscape. They also tend to like clovers, and clovers are really a cosmopolitan species that you would see maybe in your lawn. But if you're constantly mowing over your lawn, then you might be mowing over those caterpillars. So having some of the clovers in your gardenscape, I think, are very good as well. I have some trifoliums that are in our, the kind of the red feather types that are really pretty. They have like an elongated flower, also a wonderful nitrogen fixer if you're looking to build nitrogen in your land. And the dahlias, the D-A-L-E-As, the native versions, they have either a white flower top or a purple flower top. So I brought some of that seed into the meadows, but I also planted that in our pollinator as well. And knowing that they are the host plants for the gray hairstreak butterfly, I think that makes me feel a bit better because even though they're understated as far as a garden plant, but still have beautiful horticultural value, they kind of hide like within, underneath some of the larger plants. I feel great that it's actually the host plant for the gray hairstreak butterfly. So one plant that I know I wanted to have in our meadowscape is Lupinus perennis, and it's kind of a robust plant that I felt like it would be too robust in our pollinator garden, but you'll often see kind of pictures of this idyllic landscape where you just see lupin everywhere. And this is the host plant for our endangered Carner blue butterfly and also our Melissa butterfly as well. Now, I don't know whether we could attract a population of those butterflies in this area, but I will admit that Lupinus perennis is such a stately plant. It often blooms in like late May or early June when a lot of other things aren't blooming as well. And I would encourage you to plant it in the landscape if you have the right conditions for it. So we're planting it in a really kind of depauperate area where it's quite rocky, and pretty much not much else besides thistles will actually grow there. And the lupinus seems to really be thriving. So we're hoping to beef up that population of lupinus. And maybe if we're lucky, we might see a Melissa blue or a Carner blue butterfly. So you're probably wondering when I was going to get to milkweed, but if there's one plant that's really been ingrained in our mind to think about a host plant, it is milkweed, which is in Asclepias. So when we think milkweed, we think of monarch butterflies, and because monarch butterflies have become kind of rare or more threatened or endangered in parts of the world, we have been encouraged to leave Asclepias in our landscape. But there's so many different types of milkweeds that also are wonderful horticultural varieties that are a bit more well-behaved within the gardenscape. So we have Asclepias incarnata, which is our swamp milkweed. We also have our world milkweed as well, that we have like world-like leaves around the stem and these really delicate white flowers. And we noticed last year we had 3 monarch caterpillars on our swamp milkweed. Now, folks who have a much more dry environment, like maybe xeriscapes, you can look at Asclepias tuberosa, which is our pleurisy root. It has, or butterfly weed it's often called, and it usually has orange flowers, but we also have cultivated varieties. One that I recently planted up in one of our container plantings that's called Hello Yellow, that has yellow flowers as well. So there's lots of different varieties out there that you could plant within the landscape, and that would serve as wonderful plant material and host material for the monarch butterfly. Let's talk about the Asteraceae family, and specifically asters. Now, this is a plant that I mentioned is an important plant for our specialist pollinator bees, but it's also a wonderful host plant for the northern crescent butterfly and the pearl crescent butterfly, which are again more understated butterflies, but we see an ample amount of a population of both northern and pearl crescents here in our landscape. And there are so many different horticultural varieties of asters that are out there in the market, and some that are a little bit more longer blooming or that have different color blooms that I think could work really well in certain pollinator gardens. The one that I particularly like is called Lady in Black, and it has this cloud of inflorescences as well that attracts a lot of pollinators. And we've done a lot to encourage our Symphyotrichums, our asters, out in the wildscapes as well. And it's awesome to see that we have such a healthy population of northern crescents and pearl crescents, because I think it's a combination of having a lot of asters both in our gardens and also the wildscape. Okay, let's talk about the painted lady butterfly. This one has a bit more of a cosmopolitan diet as well. So it is attracted to everything from like liatris, which is one of my favorite plants, definitely my top 3 favorite plants to plant in a pollinator garden, because its flowers attract a lot of adult butterflies. But knowing that the liatris leaves will also serve as a host plant for this butterfly is really marvelous. Hollyhocks, I had mentioned that before. Sunflowers, these are all plants that painted lady butterfly are attracted to. Another one that I didn't make mention of is our Joe Pye weed. So our Eutrochium used to be called Euptoieta, maculatum, Purpureum, those plants. But I have one in the back here that is a cultivated variety called Baby Joe. So our native Euptoieta or native Eutrochium usually grows like 5-6 feet tall, and the Baby Joe grows maybe a bit more at like waist height or hip height. So it's a bit better if you're working with a smaller garden space, although it does have a tendency to spread out. I think I planted mine maybe 2 years ago now, and it's spread out to about maybe 3 to 3.5 feet. So you have to give it a little bit more space. and ensure that the robustness of the plant won't like engulf some of your other plants that you've planted around it. So those are all excellent plants that you could use to attract the painted lady butterfly. All right, so I mentioned this plant a little bit ago when I was planting the fence line. And I've always wanted to plant Dutchman's pipe after seeing it in one of the garden tours. And this is the host plant for our pipe vine swallowtail. So there's lots of different swallowtails out there. I covered the black swallowtail. Obviously, one of our more common ones is a tiger swallowtail, but I'm not going to cover that one today because that's a more cosmopolitan species that relies on trees and things. So I'm focusing mainly horticultural value plants. And I think the Dutchman's pipe is an interesting horticultural variety because it has this kind of funky, kind of tuba-shaped flower that is maybe a bit more insignificant, but it's an excellent vine that kind of grows up, and you could grow it like on an arbor or on a trellis or on a fence line like we are doing. And I noticed just the other day when I was going down there to look at the fence line and how the plants are faring, that it had lots of gnaw marks on it that looks like it was either skeletonized or that it was being used by our caterpillar. So I have not seen pipevine swallowtails around here, so I'm going to keep my eye out for that. But again, excellent plant as the host plant for the pipevine swallowtail. All right, finally we are down to our last butterflies, and that is the spring and summer azure, which are cute little small butterflies, and they have a tendency to be attracted to meadowsweet. So our native Speyerias that are out and about in our landscape, we have wet landscape in some cases, and that Speyeria seems to be attracted to that. We see it around our ponds and our meadows. Now there's a lot of Japanese Speyeria in the horticultural trade. I do not know whether they are attracted to Japanese Speyeria. So if anyone else knows, please share in the comments. I haven't noticed it, but it doesn't mean that it doesn't utilize those plants. And another plant that I wanted to make mention of that we have started to plant in our shrubbery is Ceanothus, and that is red root. Not only is it a wonderful lymphatic as a medicinal plant, but it also has this beautiful kind of white flower that comes up, and it's a shrubby plant, and I think it has great horticultural value as well. The other one that I will make mention of is also kind of, it goes from herbaceous to shrub to canopy layer, and that is our dogwood, Cornus. So our native dogwood, Cornus florida, has great horticultural value. I'm mentioning it here because yes, you would see it maybe in the landscape and it has horticultural value, but we also have shrubs that are Cornus that could serve as host plants for this insect, these butterflies. But we also have herbaceous plants called bunchberry that I have mentioned that we have planted in our shade garden that could also serve as a host plant for the spring and summer azures. So I hope this gives you a lot to think about. Again, we are in the Finger Lakes region of New York, so I'm focusing on butterflies and moths that are common here, and also emphasizing, I probably covered 15, 20, 25, I don't know how many of our native plants that also have great horticultural value. So this is an emphasis on the blooms, but also the foliage for host plants to attract some of these native butterflies and moths. So maybe in some of the next installations or the next videos that we do, we'll make emphasis on some of the weeds that you should leave in your landscape for our native butterflies and moths, because not all of our butterflies and moths are utilizing our pretty plants as their food source, and also some of the great shrubs and trees in our landscape that attract other butterflies, like for instance, our eastern tiger swallowtail, which is a common butterfly and utilizes a range of trees. So I hope this gives you a lot of food for thought. And even if you're not in our region, I hope it gives you a lot of inspiration so you could do research in your neck of the woods as to what host plants are utilized by your native butterflies and moths. All right, I'll see you in the next episode. Bye. We'll be sharing how the gardens and wildscaped areas mature as the seasons progress, so if you enjoy videos like this, be sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notifications button to help us grow and share these videos to more folks. In the meantime, we'll be cracking away at more of the gardens and renovations here at Flock. We'll see you in the next video.